The letter that summoned Father Thomas Vance to the Archdiocese of Baltimore was unusual, not for its request, but for its omissions. It arrived on a damp Tuesday in October of 1899, the paper thick as cardstock, the ink a deep official black. Thomas was not a man of action, he was a man of records. His domain was the sub-basement scriptorium, a place of dust motes and quiet decay, where he dutifully translated and archived the correspondence of bishops long since returned to dust. He was 42, thin, with spectacles that seemed perpetually fogged by the subterranean chill. He was, in short, a man built for shadows, not for casting them. The summons requested his presence regarding a matter of historical discrepancy. The cardinal, a man Thomas had seen only at Easter Mass, was a formidable presence whose interest in archival work was, to Thomas's knowledge, non-existent. He stood in the cardinal's study, a room so rich with mahogany and velvet that Thomas felt his own modest cassock absorbing the opulence like a sponge. The air smelled of old leather and, faintly, of cherry tobacco. "Father Vance," the cardinal said, not looking up from a ledger, "you are our most meticulous archivist." "You are kind, Your Eminence," Thomas murmured, clutching his valise. The cardinal finally closed the book. He pushed a thin file across the immense desk. It was beige, unmarked. "2 weeks from now, you will travel to Western Virginia, into the Appalachian Mountains. You will locate a specific site. You will observe. You will record what you find. You will then return, and this file will be filled. You will speak of it to no one else." Thomas, confused, opened the file. It contained only 2 items. The first was a rudimentary map, sketched in charcoal, showing a series of winding trails leading off the main railway line, terminating at a blank spot marked only with a stylized cross. The second was a single sheet of vellum, yellowed and brittle. On it, in faded monastic script, was a name: Sanctus Benedictus de Mechanismo, Saint Benedict of the Mechanism. "Your Eminence," Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper. I am not an exorcist. I am not an inquisitor. I am a librarian." "That is precisely why you are going," the cardinal said, his eyes hard. "An exorcist looks for the devil. I need a man who looks for the facts. This place," he waved a dismissive hand at the file, "does not exist. It has never existed. According to every record held by this archdiocese, and indeed by Rome herself, the land detailed on that map is untouched wilderness. Then what am I looking for? A mistake," the cardinal said. "A rumor, a misfiled charter from a defunct order. Decades ago, there was correspondence, whispers of a new Benedictine chapter, founded without charter, deep in those hills. They sought isolation to pursue a purer understanding of God's design. Their requests for sanction were denied. They sent one final letter, filled with unsettling doctrine, and then silence. Unsettling doctrine, Gnosticism, heresy. They spoke of the flesh as a flawed container and of God as the great architect. Not in the metaphorical sense, Father. They meant it literally." The cardinal stood, the interview clearly over. "The subsequent reports are conflicting. The file was officially sealed and then, it seems, expunged. We cannot have a hole in our history, Vance. Go and find out what filled that hole. Find the Monastery of Saint Benedict of the Mechanism, and bring me back a report stating, unequivocally, that it is nothing but a pile of fallen stones and misplaced piety." Thomas looked at the map. The lines seemed to crawl. "And if it is not, Your Eminence?" The cardinal's gaze was cold. "Then you will document why it was so vital that the Church forget it ever existed." Thomas's journey west was a jarring descent from order into chaos. The train rattled him from the civilized, electric-lit streets of Baltimore, through the rolling hills of Maryland, and deep into the rugged, untamed heart of Virginia. The civilized world fell away, replaced by steep hills and darkening hollers where the smoke from cabins clung to the trees like lost spirits. The railway itself seemed to cling to the mountainsides by sheer will. He disembarked at a town called Termination, a name he found deeply unsettling. It was little more than a muddy street, a general store, a saloon, and a livery stable, all crouched at the mouth of a dark valley. The men on the boardwalk stopped talking when he stepped off the train. His black cassock and leather valise marked him as alien, a creature from a world they neither knew nor trusted. He secured a room above the general store. The air smelled of kerosene, cured tobacco, and damp wool. He was a preacher, they assumed, but not their kind. He was Catholic, a Roman, a Pope man. In this fiercely independent Scots-Irish Protestant land, he was less than welcome. He spent the first night listening to the sounds of the mountains, not the quiet solitude of the scriptorium, but a living, breathing wilderness. The wind howled through the gaps in the valley, sounding almost like a voice. He studied the map by the light of a flickering oil lamp. The location was another 20 miles on foot, deep into the Stony Creek watershed, up a place the map simply called the Ridge. The next morning, he tried to hire a guide. The proprietor of the general store, a grizzled man named Silas, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the porch. "Ain't no one goes up the ridge, Father?" Silas said, not unkindly. "Not unless they got a mind to get lost." "I am told there is an old settlement up there," Thomas said, trying to sound casual. "Perhaps an old mission?" Silas's eyes narrowed. "Ain't no mission up there. Nothing godly anyhow. That's scrape and holler. Folks who went up there, well, they had their own ideas about things. Built a stone house, they did. Real quiet folk. Too quiet. Then they weren't quiet at all. Then they was gone." "Gone where?" Silas shrugged, turning back to his ledgers. "The mountains took 'em, or maybe something else did. Point is, the trail ain't been used in 30 years. It's choked." He paused. "There's a fella, Jebediah, lives up the creek. A trapper. He knows the woods better than any. But he won't take ye." "Why not?" "Because," Silas said, tapping his temple, "he's got sense." Thomas bought provisions, hardtack, salted pork, a heavy oiled canvas slicker, and a new lantern. He would go alone. He was a man of records, and the map was a record. He would follow it, note the pile of stones, and return to his dust motes and his vellum. He left Termination the next morning, the stares of the townsfolk feeling like physical weight on his back, and walked into the deep autumn-chilled woods. The first day of the trek was merely laborious. The trail the map had promised was a phantom, reclaimed by thickets of rhododendron and thorny vines that tore at Thomas's cassock. He was a city man, and the physical exertion was a shock. His legs burned, his lungs ached in the thin, sharp air. The sounds of Termination, the distant train whistle, the sawmill, faded within an S-hour, replaced by an oppressive, profound silence. This was the first thing he noted in his journal that night, huddled under his canvas sheet. The silence is not an absence of sound. It is a presence. There were no birds, no squirrels chattering in the high branches. The only noise was the rush of a distant creek and the constant rhythmic crunch of his own boots on the leaf-strewn forest floor. It was a dead, waiting silence. The trees, massive oaks, hickories, and pines, formed a canopy so dense that the daylight was reduced to a dim, greenish twilight, even at noon. He followed the creek as the map dictated, climbing steadily. The air grew colder. By the second day, the landscape had changed. The trees were more gnarled, the rocks larger, covered in a strange, pale green lichen that seemed to glow faintly in the dusk. He was in true wilderness now, a place that felt not just uninhabited, but unhabitable. That afternoon, he found the first sign. It was not a cross. It was a carving on a massive, flat boulder that blocked the creek. He had to wade into the icy water to see it clearly. It was the same symbol from the map. A cross, yes, but the center of it, where the two beams should meet, had been replaced. It was a complex, interlocking series of circles and teeth, a gear. Sanctus Benedictus de Mechanismo. A chill that had nothing to do with the freezing water shot up Thomas's spine. This was no rumor. Someone had been here. Someone with skill. The carving was precise, its edges still sharp despite decades of erosion. He ran a finger over it. The stone felt wrong. Not cold, but slick, almost oily to the touch, though it came away clean. He made camp early, his nerves unsettling him. As he tried to start a fire, the silence was broken. Click, 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 skitter. Thomas froze. It was a sound he couldn't place. It wasn't the scramble of a raccoon or the heavy tread of a bear. It was sharp, metallic and rhythmic. It sounded like pebbles being dropped one by one onto a tin plate, or like a very large, very dry insect. He doused his fledgling fire immediately, plunging his camp into near total darkness. He held his breath, listening. The sound moved past his camp, paralleling the creek, moving up the mountain. It was fast. It moved with a steady, metronomic purpose. Click, skitter, click. Click, skitter, click. It passed him and continued into the darkness, indifferent to his presence. He did not sleep. He sat with his back to a rock, clutching the heavy, unblessed rosary in his pocket, his mind racing. What animal moved with such a mechanical gait? The locals. Jebediah. What had Silas said? He's got sense. The next morning he found the tracks. They were pressed into the damp earth near the creek bed where he had heard the sound. They were not paw prints. They were not boot prints. They were a series of small, precise, circular indentations, paired with long, thin scratches, as if something heavy was being dragged, or was propelling itself on jointed metallic legs. His mission, as the cardinal had defined it, was to observe and record. His fear, a cold, practical thing, told him to turn back, to tell the cardinal the woods were impassable. But his nature, the meticulous, curious archivist, was now fully awake. A record had been expunged. He had just found the first footnote. He packed his valise and continued his ascent, following the creek and the strange, impossible tracks. The air grew thinner, and a new smell joined the damp earth and pine, the faint, acrid tang of rust, of old, cold iron. On the third day, the mountain changed. The forest floor gave way to sheer rock faces, and the creek became a narrow waterfall cascading down a granite cliff. The trail forced him onto a series of narrow, treacherous switchbacks. The mist here was permanent, a thick white shroud that clung to the cliffs, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet. He was navigating by sound, the rush of the water, and by feel. The tracks of the clicking thing, as he now thought of it, had vanished on the hard stone. But the acrid smell of ozone and rust was stronger, carried on the damp wind. It was a dead industrial smell, completely alien to this primordial landscape. It smelled like the slag heaps of the factories outside Baltimore, but colder, sharper. He climbed for hours, his hands raw from gripping the rock. The silence returned, thicker this time, amplified by the muffling fog. He felt utterly, terribly alone. He paused to catch his breath, leaning against a wall of rock, and realized he was not leaning against rock. He backed away, wiping his spectacles. The mist swirled, and for a moment it cleared. It was not a pile of stones. Before him stood a wall. Not a natural cliff face, but a structure of dressed black stone, slick with moisture. It was easily 40 feet high, stretching left and right into the fog, following the curve of the mountain. It was a fortification, a barrier. There was no mortar. The stones were cut with impossible precision, fitting together so tightly he couldn't wedge his knife blade between them. He followed the wall to the right, his hand trailing along its unnervingly smooth surface. He walked for nearly 5 minutes before the mist parted again, revealing the entrance. It was not a gate. It was an archway, perfectly circular, sealed by a door of solid black iron. The door was not rusted. While the rocks around it wept with moisture, the iron disc was dry, dark, and cold. In its center was a massive embossed symbol, the gear cross of Saint Benedict of the mechanism. It was a masterpiece of metallurgy, something that would have cost a fortune and required a foundry. Here, in the absolute middle of nowhere, there was no handle, no keyhole, no hinge. It was sealed. Thomas circled it, frustrated. He pushed on the iron. It was immovable, thick as a bank vault. He had come all this way for a report on a door. He sat on a wet stone, pulling out his journal. Have located the site. It is sealed. The architecture is precise, far beyond the means of a simple monastic order. As he wrote, he heard it again. Click, 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 skitter. It was inside. On the other side of the iron door. He pressed his ear to the cold metal. He could hear movement, a faint, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump, like a colossal heart or a slow, powerful engine. And over it, the light, sharp clicking, moving back and forth as if patrolling. He backed away, his heart hammering. He was trapped. The sun was setting. The mist was turning a deep, cold purple. He couldn't descend the switchbacks in the dark. He would have to spend the night here, at the foot of this impossible wall, with that moving behind it. He found a small overhang, a shallow cave in the rock face about 50 yards from the iron door. He huddled inside, wrapping himself in his canvas, too terrified to light his lantern. He sat in the dark, listening. The deep rhythmic thump from within the mountain continued all night. Thump, thump, thump. It was a pulse, a vibration he felt in his bones more than heard with his ears. And the clicking. It never stopped, back and forth, patrolling, guarding. He dozed fitfully, his dreams filled with grinding gears and dark, oily water. He awoke just before dawn to a new sound, a grinding, a scraping of stone on stone. He peered out from his shelter. The mist was thick, but he could see the great iron door. It was open. Not wide, but ajar, a black slit of deeper darkness in the gray morning. He had not been invited in. He had been allowed in. The patrol had known he was there all along. His orders were to observe and record. The cardinal's words echoed in his mind. Find out why it was so vital that the church forget. The fear was a cold, solid weight in his stomach, but the archivist's curiosity was a sharper, hotter thing. He had to know what was in the file. He gathered his valise, checked that his lantern was full, and lit the wick. Holding the small brass ring of light before him, Father Thomas Vance stepped out of the mist and through the gap in the iron door, into the heart of the Appalachian Monastery. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air changed. The damp, living chill of the mountain was gone, replaced by a dry, sterile cold that smelled of iron, ozone, and something else, something savory and sharp, like old pennies. The great iron door swung shut behind him with a hiss of pneumatics and a heavy final clang that echoed down the corridor. He was in absolute darkness, save for the small circle of his lantern. He was in a tunnel, not a natural cave, but a perfect cylinder of dressed stone, identical to the outer wall. The floor was smooth, polished by a traffic his mind refused to name. He held up his lantern. The corridor stretched forward into blackness, and he could hear it, the sound he'd heard from outside, the great rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was clearer now, coming from deep below. It was the sound of a massive, impossibly slow engine, a colossal piston driving some unseen works. He walked, his soft boots silent on the stone. The only sound was the thump and the faint hiss of his lantern. The corridor was long, descending at a shallow angle. There were no decorations, no crucifixes, no stations of the cross, no sign of God at all. Only the cold, precise stone and the pervasive smell of machinery. He came to an intersection. The tunnel split left and right. There was no sign, no light. He chose left, marking the wall with a piece of chalk from his valise. The thump grew louder. The corridor widened, opening into a vast dark space. He raised his lantern. He was in a scriptorium, but it was a scriptorium from a nightmare. Instead of wooden desks and benches, the room was filled with dozens of high, slanted tables made of dark metal. Upon them were not books, but vast, intricate diagrams etched onto sheets of copper and slate. They were blueprints. He moved closer, his breath fogging in the cold. They were anatomical charts. A human arm, laid bare, muscles and bone rendered in perfect detail. And beside it, a new design. The bone was replaced with steel rods, the muscle with cabled wires and hydraulic pistons. A human hand, next to a schematic of articulated brass fingers. He stumbled back, knocking over a high stool. It clattered on the stone floor. The thump stopped. The silence that fell was absolute. It was worse than the sound. The heart of the monastery had paused. And then, from the darkness on the far side of the scriptorium, came the reply. Click, skitter, click, click, click. It was in the room with him. Thomas froze, his blood turning to ice. He pointed his lantern into the blackness. The beam caught movement. Something large. It was one of the monks, as he had dreaded. It was standing by a pillar, perfectly still, watching him. It wore the dark, heavy robe of a Benedictine, but the proportions were wrong. It was too tall, its shoulders too wide and rigid. The cowl was pulled deep, obscuring any face in a pool of shadow. In nomine Patris, Thomas began, his voice shaking, raising his rosary. Click. The sound was sharp, a mechanical negation. The figure took a step forward into the light. It did not walk. It glided as if on wheels. Who are you? Thomas stammered. The figure stopped. From the darkness of the cowl, there was no reply. Only another, softer sound. A whirring. A low like a clockwork mechanism winding itself. The figure raised a hand. It was not a hand. It was a metal claw, three-fingered, articulate, crafted from dull brass and steel. It held a long, thin rod of iron, tapping it against the floor. Click, click, click. It was one of the clicking men the townsfolk feared. I am a visitor, Thomas said, trying to sound firm. Sent from the archdiocese. I am here to see the abbot. The cowled figure tilted its head. The movement was not human. It was too smooth, a perfect 30-degree rotation. It made a soft snick sound as it locked into place. It seemed to be listening, not to Thomas, but to something else, to the silence. Then the great thump resumed from below. Thump, thump, thump. The creature, the monk, seemed to relax. The tension left its rigid shoulders. It turned away from Thomas, its purpose re-engaged. It glided over to one of the metal desks, picked up a complex tool that looked like a caliper and a wrench combined, and began making minute adjustments to a large celestial model, an orrery, in the center of the room. But this orrery was not of the solar system. It was a complex model of interlocking gears spinning on multiple axes. It was ignoring him. He was not a threat. He was irrelevant. Thomas backed away slowly, his heart racing. He was in a workshop, a factory. The monks were not men of prayer. They were mechanics. They were the maintenance crew for the great engine that pulsed at the heart of the mountain. He fled the scriptorium, taking the other tunnel, deeper into the monastery. He had to find the source of the thump. He had to find the abbot. He had to understand what heresy this was. He passed openings in the wall, cells. He peered into one. It was not a place of rest. There was no cot, no prayer kneeler. There was only a stone slab, and hanging on the walls, a collection of polished steel tools, saws, files, wrenches, and strange articulated braces. It was not a bedroom. It was a repair bay. The deeper Thomas went, the more the monastery defied his understanding. The architecture was immense. He passed over a chasm on a narrow iron bridge. Looking down, he saw not a natural cavern but a shaft, perfectly circular, descending into darkness. From it rose the thump, and with it, a blast of hot, oily air. The main drive shaft. He was in a machine. The entire mountain had been hollowed out and turned into a colossal engine. He found a door, this one of wooden planks, a strange organic intrusion in the world of stone and metal. It was marked with a simple carved A, the abbot's office. He pushed it open. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the monastery. It was a scholar's study. Books lined the walls, lit by a single mesmerizing light source, a large glass bulb on the desk that glowed with a steady white light. It was electric, decades before such a thing should be common, powered by the thrumming engine of the mountain. The room was pristine, no dust, but it was empty. On the desk, next to the impossible light, lay a single, leather-bound journal. It was open. Thomas, the archivist, was drawn to it like a moth. The handwriting was precise, elegant, and chillingly sane. January 4th, 1871. I have found it. After decades of searching, following the ley lines, the resonances, I have found the heart. It is not a place, but a pulse. A vibration in the rock, here, deep in these mountains. The locals fear it. They call it a haunt. They are children. It is not a spirit. It is a presence. It is the sound of the Deus Absconditus, the hidden god, toiling at his great work. Thomas flipped forward. The entries were daily, meticulous. March 12, 1871. We have begun the excavation. The brothers are strong, but the flesh is weak. Brother Marcus fell. His arm was crushed by a shifting stone. The pulse seems to guide our hands. We are not building a monastery. We are excavating one. It is already here. We are merely clearing the debris from his great machine. Thomas's hand was shaking. He read on, the entries detailing the next 10 years. The brothers were not monks, but engineers, disgraced academics, and metallurgists, all drawn by the abbot's radical, heretical vision. May 29, 1878. The heart is exposed. It is a vast geared mechanism buried in the mountain's core, not of human make. We cannot understand its purpose, only its perfection. It moves with a rhythm that dictates the turning of the stars, but it is damaged. Time has worn it. The thump is irregular. Our sacred duty is clear. We are not here to pray. We are here to repair. The entries grew more frantic. The repairs required precision the human hand could not offer. November 2nd, 1883. Brother John presented his solution, a marvel. He has replaced his damaged hand, lost in the forge, with one of steel and brass, powered by small pneumatics. It is tireless. It is precise. The flesh is a distraction. It is prone to error, to fatigue, to sin. The machine is pure. It only is. Thomas felt sick. He turned to the last few pages. July 18th, 1889. The conversion is almost complete. We have shed the weakness of the flesh. The last of my own organic parts were removed today. The pain was an inefficiency. But now I see. My eyes are lenses, my thoughts are calculations. The pulse is no longer a sound I hear. It is a command I receive. We are no longer just monks. We are attendants. We serve the mechanism. We are components, perfected. August 1st, 1889. The Church has sent another letter. They call us heretics. They do not understand. They worship a God of words and sentiment. We serve the God of action, the God of physics, the prime mover. They have threatened to send men to cleanse this place. They are inefficient. They will not find us. The mechanism will protect its own. And the final entry, dated only 2 weeks before Thomas's arrival, October 12th, 1899. The pulse is strong, but a new imperfection has been detected. A noise, a small organic variable approaching from the outside world. It is a flaw in the system. It must be observed. It must be assessed. If it is a threat to the work, it must be corrected, integrated, made efficient. Thomas dropped the book. He was the imperfection, the noise, the clicking he'd heard outside, the creature in the scriptorium. They weren't patrolling. They were assessing him. He looked at the glowing bulb on the desk. He was in a trap. He backed out of the office, his mind reeling. He was not in a monastery. He was inside a living, thinking machine, and its attendants were no longer human. Thomas ran. He stumbled back the way he came, his mind a whirlwind of heresy and mechanical horror. The abbot's journal had confirmed his worst fears. This was not a place of worship. It was a place of conversion. They had not been building something. They had been changing themselves, shedding their humanity piece by piece, replacing it with brass and steel, all in service to a mechanism they found in the mountain. He had to see it. He had to see the heart they worshipped. He took the main passage, the one that led down, over the iron bridge, and toward the source of the great pulsing thump. The air grew hotter, thick with the smell of hot metal and ozone. The very stones beneath his feet vibrated with the slow, powerful rhythm. It was a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. The tunnel opened into an immense circular chamber. It was a cathedral, but a cathedral redesigned by a mad industrialist. The ceiling was lost in shadows, supported by massive iron girders, not stone arches. The chamber was lit by the same glowing electric bulbs as the abbot's office, casting a stark, shadowless white light. In the center of the chamber, descending into a pit so deep its bottom was invisible, was the god. It was a machine, a colossal churning engine of brass, iron, and copper, 50 feet across. Pistons the size of carriages drove a central crankshaft, which in turn rotated a series of planet-sized gears. It was an orrery, a clock, and a factory press fused into one. It moved with a slow, ponderous, unstoppable grace. The thump was the sound of the main piston completing its cycle. This was the prime mover, the mechanism, and attending it were the monks. There were at least a dozen of them, moving across a network of catwalks and platforms that surrounded the great engine. They were the clicking men. Now, in the full light, Thomas could see them clearly. They were horrors. The robes were gone, cast aside as inefficient. They were skeletons of metal, their original human forms visible only in faint outline. Some still had human heads, but their eyes were replaced with glowing telescopic lenses. Others had lost their heads entirely, replaced with smooth brass spheres. Their arms were pneumatic and multi-jointed, ending in a variety of specialized tools, wrenches, calipers, welders. Their legs were gone, replaced by tri-legged insectoid apparatuses that allowed them to skitter along the girders with terrifying speed and precision. Click, skitter, click. They were spiders. They were priests. They were mechanics. They moved in perfect, synchronized harmony. Not a single motion was wasted. One would tighten a massive bolt, another would follow, applying a drop of oil from a spigot on its finger. They were praying. This was their liturgy, the sacred act of maintenance. Thomas hid behind a pillar watching, his stomach churning. He saw one of the creatures pause. Its brass head swiveled, the lenses zooming, focusing on a large pressure gauge. The needle on the gauge was fluttering, dipping into the red, an imperfection. The creature emitted a series of high-pitched shrieks, not a voice, but a burst of steam whistle code. Two other monks skittered over. They conferred, their metal heads close together, emitting a flurry of sharp metallic clicks. They had a problem, and Thomas, watching from the shadows, realized what the journal meant. This machine was ancient, and it was breaking. The gauge continued to flutter. The great thump of the engine faltered. Thump, 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 cut, thunk. A shudder ran through the entire mountain. The lights flickered. The attendants went into a frenzy, skittering across the machine, their movements suddenly jerky, desperate. The steam whistle shrieks became constant, a panicked, mechanical cacophony. One of the creatures, its torso still vaguely human, pointed its clawed metallic hand at a massive lever across the chasm. It shrieked, a command. Another monk, smaller, more insectoid, began to scramble toward it. But it was too late. With a sound like a cannon firing, a massive pipe near the fluttering gauge burst. A jet of superheated steam erupted, screaming through the chamber. The smaller monk was caught in the blast. It was thrown from the catwalk, its metal body pinwheeling as it fell into the darkness of the pit. It made no sound as it fell, just a metallic clang as it vanished. The other monks paused. They looked at the spot where their brother had fallen. For a single agonizing second, the perfect clockwork motion of the chapel ceased, and Thomas, in that moment, understood the final, deepest horror. The journal was wrong. The monks thought they had achieved perfection. They thought they had shed their flawed human sentiment. But they hadn't. They had failed. They were still human enough to be afraid. They were afraid of the very God they had built themselves to serve. The machine thumped again, a broken, grinding sound. The imperfection was growing. The God was failing, and its priests were panicking. This was the evil the church had buried, not an active malice, but a failed transcendence, a heresy that had trapped its followers in a metal purgatory, slaves to a broken idol. The chaos in the chapel was short-lived. The machine monks, after their brief, telling pause, returned to their work with a renewed, frantic energy. The ruptured pipe was shrieking, venting pressure that the machine clearly needed. The great thump of the central piston was growing weaker, more sporadic. Thump, hiss, thump, clank, hiss. Thomas knew he should flee. He had his answer. This was the evil, a mechanistic cult that had destroyed itself, a heresy of gears and pistons. He could write his report. They are gone, destroyed by their own creation. But as he began to back away, a new sound cut through the hiss of steam and the clanging of the engine. It wasn't a click, it wasn't a thump, it was a voice. The cog is slipping, the pressure is inefficient. The voice was dry, resonant, like stones grinding together. Yet it held a perfect, cultured diction. It came from a high platform above the main engine, a place Thomas hadn't seen, shrouded in shadow. Attendant 7 is lost. The voice continued, a cold statement of fact. The primary valve cannot be reached. The cascade failure has begun. Thomas peered into the darkness. There, sitting on a throne-like chair that seemed wired directly into the wall, was the abbot. He was magnificent and terrible. He was almost entirely machine. Unlike the skittering attendants, his form was massive, stationary. His body was a great barrel-like torso of polished copper, fused to the chair and through a series of thick, humming cables to the monastery itself. His original arms were gone, replaced by 4 delicate, spider-like limbs, currently hovering over a complex control panel of levers and glowing gauges. And his head. It was the only part of him that was truly, visibly human. The head of a scholar. Pale, ancient, bald, with sharp features and a long, white beard. But his eyes were gone. In their sockets glowed the same white electric light as the bulb in his study. He was blind, yet he saw everything. He was the abbot from the journal, and he was plugged in. An organic variable, the abbot said, his voice emanating from a brass grill on his chest. He turned his head, the glowing eyes looking directly at Thomas's hiding place. The noise, the imperfection. Father Thomas Vance, archivist, 3rd class, Archdiocese of Baltimore. Thomas stepped out from behind the pillar, his rosary feeling like a child's toy. How do you know my name? It was in the request. The abbot's speaker voice rasped. The cardinal. He is an inefficient man. He still uses paper. We receive all their correspondence, the telegraph lines. They sing to us. The wires pass over our mountain. We hear the world. We hear its chaos, its inefficiency. What have you done? Thomas whispered, gesturing to the failing machine, to the skittering attendants. We have done the work, the abbot replied. We are correcting the great flaw, the flaw of the flesh, the flaw of choice. The universe is a clock, Father. It was wound at the beginning of time, and it has been ticking perfectly ever since. But humanity, with its passions, its fears, its faith, you are the sand in the gears. You introduce chaos. We are the correction. We are the attendants of the mechanism. The machine is failing, Thomas said, pointing to the ruptured pipe. Your God is breaking. A temporary setback, the abbot rasped. The mechanism is ancient. It requires maintenance. The attendants are flawed. They were converted too late. The human sentiment lingers. They panic. They make errors. The abbot's 4 metal arms moved with blurring speed across his control panel, compensating. The hissing steam lessened, and the thump grew slightly more regular. But you, the abbot's glowing eyes fixed on him, you are new. You are precise. An archivist, a man of order, of systems. You understand the beauty of a perfect record. A cold dread settled on Thomas. What are you saying? The attendant corps is depleted. We require a new hand, one with the patience of a scholar, one who appreciates the logic of the system. The abbot's voice was becoming persuasive. Thomas felt the thump of the engine, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded logical, rhythmic, orderly. He thought of his scriptorium, the dust, the disorganized piles, the sheer frustrating chaos of human history. We can offer you perfection, Father Vance, the abbot's voice hummed. Clarity, a mind free of the flesh's distractions. You will see the blueprint of the universe. You will be a part of the great work. You will no longer be a recorder of flawed history. You will be a gear in the perfect future. One of the skittering attendants appeared at Thomas's side. It had moved without a sound. It held a tray. On the tray was a syringe filled with a dark, oily liquid, and beside it, a beautifully crafted, articulated hand of gleaming brass. The first step is always the hardest, the abbot hummed. Shed the inefficient, join the work. Thomas looked at the brass hand. It was beautiful, perfect. He thought of his own hands, calloused, ink-stained, clumsy. He thought of the world outside, a world of war, of grime, of disorganized, chaotic life. It's logical, Thomas heard himself say. The thump of the engine felt like his own heart. Thump, thump, thump. He reached out. Thomas's fingers brushed the cold, polished brass of the offered hand. It was intricate, a marvel of engineering. Each joint was a tiny, perfect bearing. He felt the pull of it, the promise of a world without error, without the clumsy fumbling of his own humanity. The abbot's hum was a siren song of pure, cold reason. It makes sense. It is efficient. The attendant beside him whirred, holding the syringe steady. A simple anesthetic, the abbot's voice explained, to quiet the inefficient protests of the flesh. Then the work can begin. Thomas looked from the hand to the abbot. The man was a prisoner, fused to a wall, his entire existence dedicated to maintaining a machine that was, itself, failing. He was a slave to his own idea of perfection. You said the attendants were flawed, Thomas said, his voice quiet, pulling his hand back. You said the human sentiment lingers, that they panic. A temporary state, the abbot replied, his voice losing its persuasive hum, growing sharper. A miscalculation. The conversion process is being refined. You were afraid, Thomas said, the realization hitting him. When I came here, you knew I was coming. You didn't stop me. You let me in. The door was open. The abbot's metal arms paused. Variables must be assessed. You were a potential asset. No, Thomas said, stepping back from the attendant. You're failing. The machine is breaking, and your attendants aren't good enough to fix it. You can't reach the valve. You needed me. You needed a new hand, a fresh human hand. The abbot was silent. The only sound was the thump-clank of the damaged engine and the hiss of the ruptured pipe. You didn't shed your humanity, Abbot, Thomas said, his voice gaining strength. You just calcified it. You're still driven by the most human of all feelings, fear. You're afraid of this machine. You're afraid of failing it. Click, shriek. The abbot's voice was no longer a hum. It was a roar amplified by the brass grill. Inefficient, inaccurate. The variable is a threat. Correct the variable. The attendant beside Thomas moved. Its brass claw snapped out, aiming not for his arm but for his neck. Thomas threw himself backward, his valise flying. He scrambled away as the attendant lunged, its three-legged gait terrifyingly fast. Click, skitter, click. The flesh is weak. The flesh must be purged, the abbot shrieked. The lights in his eyes glowed a furious, pulsing red. Thomas ran, back toward the iron bridge. He heard the attendant right behind him, its metal feet striking sparks on the stone floor. He looked back and saw two more skittering down from the girders, converging on him. He was in a cathedral of metal, and the congregation was hunting him. He ran for his life, back up the sloping tunnel, his lungs burning in the hot, oily air. The thump of the engine was a sound of pursuit, a pounding war drum. Thump, clank, thump, clank. He reached the iron bridge over the chasm. He could hear them coming, the clicking getting louder, echoing in the confined space. He ran onto the bridge. Halfway across, one of the attendants dropped from the ceiling in front of him. It was the one from the scriptorium, the tall one. It blocked his path, tilting its cowled head. From the darkness of the hood, a new tool extended, a long, thin pincer, snapping open and shut. Thomas was trapped. The other two were closing in from behind. He looked down, into the chasm. The main drive shaft, the source of the thump, was 10 feet below, a massive rotating cylinder of iron, slick with oil. The attendant in front of him lunged. Thomas didn't think. He reacted. He grabbed the railing of the bridge and swung his legs over the side. He let go. He fell, landing hard on the massive moving drive shaft. The impact knocked the wind out of him. The shaft was slick, and it was rotating, slowly but with immense power. He was being carried, dragged away from the bridge, deeper into the dark. He looked up. The three attendants were on the bridge looking down at him. Their lens eyes glowed red. They were machines. They couldn't jump. They couldn't risk the main drive. He had escaped, but he was now on the machine. He was being carried into the darkness, into the very heart of the engine, toward an unknown destination. The shaft rotated, and he saw a new tunnel opening up. A maintenance shaft. He was being delivered. He heard the abbot's voice echo from the chapel. calmer now, chillingly satisfied. A new path. The mechanism provides. The variable will be integrated. The drive shaft was a terrifying ride. It was as wide as a carriage, slick with black grease, and it turned with the slow, rhythmic thump of the engine. Thomas lay flat, clutching a raised seam in the metal, trying not to be rolled off into the darkness below. The air here was almost unbearably hot, thick with the smell of scorched metal. He was being carried away from the chapel, deeper into the mountain's core. The shaft passed through a narrow, brick-lined tunnel. He could hear the clicks of the attendants above him, on the catwalks, following him. They were not chasing, they were escorting. He was cargo. After what felt like an eternity, the shaft entered another, larger chamber. This one was dark, but he could see shapes. This was a maintenance hub, a nexus of smaller gears and pistons, all driven by the main shaft he was on. He saw an opportunity. A stationary iron ladder was bolted to the far wall, just within reach. As the shaft rotated, bringing him close, he braced himself. He had one chance. He let go of the seam, rolled once, and leapt. His hands caught the cold iron rung. His feet swung free, kicking over the chasm. For a terrifying second he dangled, his arms screaming in their sockets. He pulled himself up, rung by rung, his hands slipping on the grease from the shaft. He reached a narrow metal platform, collapsing onto it, gasping. He was safe, for now. He lit his lantern, which he had miraculously managed to keep slung on his shoulder. He was in a maze of pipes and smaller machinery. The thump was everywhere, vibrating through the metal floor. He was utterly lost. He checked his valise. His journal was there, his chalk, his flask of water. He took a long drink, his mind racing. The abbot wanted him, wanted his orderly mind. He was not a threat to be eliminated. He was a component to be installed. He chose a tunnel at random, moving away from the heat of the main shaft. He had to find a way up. The monastery was built into the mountain. The main entrance was sealed. There had to be another way out. A ventilation shaft, a chimney. The tunnels here were smaller, clearly not meant for human passage. They were maintenance corridors for the attendants. The walls were slick with grime, and thick, bundled cables, the nerves of the monastery, ran along the ceiling like metallic vines. He walked for what felt like Anley hour, marking his path with chalk. The tunnels twisted, turned, and descended. He was going the wrong way. He was going down. He came to a stop. The tunnel ahead was blocked. Not by a cave-in, but by a pile of refuse. He raised his lantern. It was a scrap heap, a dumping ground. He saw discarded metal parts, broken brass fingers, cracked lenses, bent pneumatic limbs, the attendants' broken pieces, and among them, other things. He saw a pile of dark, heavy cloth, Benedictine robes, cast aside, and beneath them, pale, organic shapes. He stepped closer, his dread growing. It was a pile of parts, human parts. Not in a gory way, but in a way that was almost worse. They were preserved, as if in brine, in large glass vats. A collection of hands, stacked like gloves. A row of feet. Jars of eyes, their blue and brown irises staring blankly. This was the inefficient flesh, the parts the monks had shed. Thomas clamped a hand over his mouth, stumbling back. This was the larder, the storage room for the pieces they had cut away. This was the flaw the abbot had spoken of. As he reeled, his lantern light fell on a shape in the corner. It was not in a vat. It was huddled on the floor. It was a man, or it had been. He was ancient, skeletal, wrapped in a single tattered blanket. He had no legs. His arms ended in stumps at the elbow. His eyes were missing, the sockets dark and hollow. But he was alive. His chest rose and fell in a shallow, rattling breath. Thomas rushed to him. My God, who are you?" The man's head turned toward the sound of Thomas's voice. His lips, cracked and pale, moved. A sound emerged, a dry, whispering click. Click. He was trying to speak, but his tongue was gone. He was clicking, like the attendants. Thomas looked closer. The man's throat, a portion of his neck, had been replaced with a small brass grill, identical to the abbot's, but broken. This was a failed conversion. A monk whose body had rejected the perfection. He had been discarded, thrown on the scrap heap, but his upgrades kept him breathing, kept him aware. The man raised one of his stumps. He clicked again, desperately, and pointed. Not at Thomas, not at the exit. He was pointing at a specific object on the scrap heap, a long, heavy iron pry bar. Thomas looked at the man, confused. The man clicked again, a sound of utter, profound pleading. Click, click. Shh. Thomas understood. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't asking for escape. He was asking to be finished. He was a flawed record, begging to be expunged. Thomas was a priest. He could not. He knelt, his hand shaking, and made the sign of the cross over the ruined man. Ego te absolvo. The man's head thrashed. He emitted a horrible whistling shriek from his broken speaker. It was a sound of pure rage. He didn't want absolution. He wanted release. He was an error. He wanted to be corrected. Click, skitter, click. The shriek had been an alarm. Thomas heard the attendants coming, their metal feet echoing from the tunnel he'd just left. He grabbed the pry bar. It was heavy, solid iron, a tool, a weapon. He turned to the ruined monk. "May God forgive us both," he whispered. He didn't do what the man asked. He couldn't. He ran. He plunged into a new tunnel, opposite the way he'd come, leaving the ruined monk to his fate, the desperate, angry clicking fading behind him. He was no longer just an archivist. He was a man holding an iron bar, running for his life in a tomb of living machines. The tunnels were a labyrinth, and Thomas was the mouse. He ran, the pry bar heavy in his hand, the clicking of his pursuers echoing from multiple directions. They were flanking him. They knew the maze. He took a sharp turn into a passage that went steeply up. Heat. He was moving toward the surface, or at least toward a different part of the engine. The air grew thick and heavy, and the thump of the main engine was joined by a new sound, a high-pitched metallic whine. The tunnel opened onto another catwalk high above the chapel. He was on the other side of the chamber, looking down at the abbot's throne and the failing machine. The main steam pipe was still venting, a plume of white clouding the air. The whine was coming from a massive flywheel, spinning so fast it was a blur. It was connected to a dynamo. They were generating their own electricity. An attendant burst from the tunnel behind him. He spun, swinging the pry bar. He struck it on its shoulder, a pneumatic joint. The metal screamed. The attendant stumbled, its arm hanging useless, but it recovered instantly, lunging with its other claw. Thomas ducked, scrambling along the catwalk. He had to find a way out. He saw it, across the chamber, near the abbot's platform. A ventilation shaft, a large circular opening covered by a simple iron grill. He had to cross the chamber, past the abbot himself. He ran. The attendants were below him, starting to climb the girders. They were fast. "The variable is persistent," the abbot's voice boomed, no longer angry, but curious. "It resists correction. Fascinating. The flaw of will is strong in this one." Thomas reached the platform near the abbot's throne. The glowing eyes followed him. "You cannot escape the mechanism, Father. You are in it. It is the world. It is the universe. Surrender is logical." "Your logic is flawed, Abbot," Thomas yelled, breathing hard as he ran to the ventilation shaft. "You're a prisoner, not a god." He reached the shaft. The grill was heavy, bolted to the stone. He jammed the pry bar under the edge. Click, skitter, click. An attendant was right behind him, skittering up the wall. He put all his weight on the bar. The bolts groaned, the metal bent. The attendant was on him. Its claw seized his valise, ripping it from his shoulder. The valise flew open, his journal, his chalk, his hardtack, all scattered, falling into the mist-filled chasm of the engine room. No, his records, his observations. They were gone. The Atsar, search and rescue attendant, raised its pincer. Thomas gave one last, desperate heave. The grill burst open with a clang. He threw himself into the shaft, into the blackness. He landed hard, scraping his hands and knees on the rough-hewn stone. He scrambled forward, deeper into the shaft, as the attendant's claw snapped at his heel. He was in. He was safe. He crawled for several minutes in pitch darkness. The shaft was round, steep, and blissfully silent. The thump of the engine faded behind him, replaced by a new sound. The wind. He was crawling toward the outside. The shaft was a chimney, drawing air for the forges or the steam engine. The air grew cold, fresh, tasting of pine and damp earth. He saw a pinprick of light. Hope surged in him. He crawled faster, the hope giving him a strength he didn't know he possessed. The light grew, becoming a gray, misty circle. The exit. He pulled himself out, tumbling onto a rocky ledge. He was outside. He was on the mountainside, high above the main entrance. The mist was thick, the sun just a pale disk in the sky. He was alive. He stood up, his body aching, and breathed in the clean, cold air. And then he heard the whine. It wasn't the dynamo. It was the sound he'd heard just before. It was louder out here. He looked around, confused. The sound was coming from the air, from the mountain itself. He saw them. Telegraph wires. Dozens of them. They weren't from the monastery. They were the main trunk lines for the entire state, strung on high poles, passing right over this ridge. The abbot's words came back to him. The telegraph lines. They sing to us. We hear the world. The monastery wasn't just in the mountain, it was using the mountain. The whole ridge was a giant antenna. The abbot wasn't just maintaining a machine. He was listening. Thomas looked at the wires, humming with their electric messages. And as he listened, he heard it. Beneath the hum of the wind, beneath the whine of the wires, he heard a new sound, carried on the air. Click, click, thump, click. It wasn't coming from the monastery behind him. It was coming from the town below him, from Termination. He looked down the mountain, his blood running cold. The sound was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A rhythmic clicking, a slow mechanical pulse. The abbot wasn't trying to repair the machine. He was expanding. The imperfection he was correcting wasn't the machine. It was the world. Termination. The general store. The railway station. Click, thump, click. He wasn't an escapee. He was a messenger. And he was already too late. The descent was a nightmare. Thomas didn't follow the path. He plunged straight down the mountainside, half falling, half sliding through the thickets and scree. The pry bar was still in his hand, a cold, heavy comfort. Every shadow seemed to hold the glint of brass. Every gust of wind seemed to carry the click-skitter of an attendant. But he was alone. The mountain was silent, as if it had let him go. The sun was setting by the time he staggered out of the tree line and onto the muddy track that led to Termination. He was a frightful sight. His cassock was in tatters, his face black with grease and soot, his hands raw. He looked like a man who had crawled from his own grave. He stumbled toward the lights of the general store. The town was quiet, too quiet. The same dead, waiting silence he'd felt on the mountain. The saloon was dark. The livery stable was shuttered. He burst through the door of the general store, the bell above it ringing frantically. "Silas!" he yelled, his voice a dry croak. "Silas, you have to listen!" The store was dim, lit by a single lantern on the counter. Silas was there, behind his ledger, just as Thomas had left him. "Well now, Father," Silas said, not looking up. His voice was flat, monotone. "You look like you've seen a spook." "Worse, Silas, much worse," Thomas panted, leaning on the counter. "The monastery. It's still active. They've changed. They're not men. They're efficient," Silas said. He closed his ledger. The movement was smooth, precise. Click. Thomas froze. He looked at Silas. The storekeeper's eyes were wrong. His pupils were fixed, unblinking. He smiled, and the smile was just a baring of teeth, a mechanical gesture. "We were so inefficient, Father," Silas said, his voice a perfect, passionless drone. "So much waste, so much chaos. The abbot, he sent us the word. He sent us the design." The telegraph?" Thomas whispered. "It sings, Father," Silas said. He turned his head. The movement was jerky, accompanied by a soft snick sound. It sang to the telegraph operator first. "Mr. Henderson, a man of systems like you." Thomas looked around the store. The shelves, once cluttered, were now perfectly organized. Cans were stacked in precise geometric pyramids. The floor was swept clean. "Where is everyone?" Thomas asked, his hand tightening on the pry bar. "They are at the word. At the station. They are integrating." Silas stood up. He was wearing his usual overalls, but beneath the cuff of his shirt, Thomas saw it. His wrist. It wasn't flesh. It was a jointed copper articulation. Click, thump, click. The sound was coming from the back room. "You have to stop," Thomas pleaded. "This isn't perfection. It's an ending." "All chaos must end, Father," Silas said. "The abbot has shown us the way. The mechanism must be served. You are an imperfection. You must be corrected." Silas reached under the counter. He didn't pull out a shotgun. He pulled out a tool. A heavy, complex-looking wrench, modified with sharp, pincer-like appendages. He advanced, his gait stiff, his feet hitting the floor in a perfect, steady rhythm. Thump, thump. From the back room, the door opened. Two townsmen emerged. Thomas recognized them from the saloon. Their faces were blank. Their eyes, like Silas's, were fixed. They too carried modified tools. "Join the work, Father," Silas intoned, raising the wrench. "It is logical." Thomas didn't hesitate. He swung the pry bar. He struck Silas's arm. There was no cry of pain, just a crack of copper and a hiss of pneumatics. The arm went limp. Silas looked at it, confused, as if a tool had broken. Thomas shoved him back, knocking over a pyramid of cans. They rolled across the floor with a terrible clatter. He ran for the door. He burst onto the street. The town was not empty. They were all there, the whole population of Termination. They were gathered in the street, standing in perfect, silent rows, facing the railway station. Men, women. No, he thought, his heart stopping. Not. He saw a small shape in the front row. A child, standing stock still, its head tilted, listening. The sound was coming from the railway station, a loud, rhythmic click, thump, click. It was the telegraph. Henderson, the operator, was broadcasting the word, the pulse, the rhythm of the machine. They were all listening to it. And as they listened, they were changing. Their movements were becoming small, jerky, synchronized. One by one, they all turned their heads. In perfect mechanical unison, they all looked at Thomas. 100 blank, passionless faces. He was the imperfection. He was the noise in the system. From the crowd, a voice emerged. Not a human voice, a speaker voice. It came from Mr. Henderson, the telegraph operator, who was walking toward him. Half his face was gone, replaced by a brass plate and a glowing lens. "The variable is detected," the speaker on his chest rasped. "The correction is required." The entire town took one synchronized step toward him. Thomas ran. He fled down the muddy street, the unified rhythmic thump of the townsfolk's boots behind him. It wasn't a panicked chase. It was a slow, inexorable, efficient pursuit. They were hurting him. He looked for an escape. The woods. But they were coming from that direction too. He saw Jebediah, the old trapper Silas had mentioned. Jebediah was different. He moved on all fours, his limbs elongated, replaced with articulated spider-like rods. He was a completed attendant, skittering through the mud. They were driving him toward the railway station, toward the source of the clicking. He was trapped. He turned, his back to the station platform, holding the pry bar like a cross. "In the name of God, stop." They stopped. The entire town, 100 strong, formed a perfect semicircle around him. They stood silent, unblinking, their heads tilted, listening to the click-thump-click of the telegraph. "It is the word of the true God, Father," Henderson rasped, his lens eye glowing. "The God of order, the God of the mechanism." "This isn't God," Thomas yelled, his voice raw. "This is one mad, broken old man in a mountain. A heretic, he's using you." "He is unifying us," Henderson said. "He is cleansing the inefficiency. And now, he will cleanse you." From the railway station, a new sound. A heavy metal clang. A large shape emerged from the shadows of the loading dock. It was the monk, From the monastery. The tall one. The one whose pincer had torn his valise. It had descended. It must have followed him down the mountain, or it had been waiting here. The townsfolk parted, creating a path. The attendant glided forward, its metal claws holding a new tool, a long silver rod that hummed with a faint blue energy. A welder. The abbot is disappointed. Henderson's speaker droned. Your mind was an asset, but your will is a contamination. It cannot be integrated. It must be erased. The attendant raised the welder. The blue tip hissed. Thomas looked at the crowd, at the blank faces, at the small child, its eyes fixed, its foot tapping in time with the telegraph. Click. Thump. Click. This was the evil, not the machine, not the abbot, but the surrender to it. The blissful, horrific emptiness of perfect, logical order. He thought of his journal, lost in the chasm. The record was gone. The cardinal would never know. The church would never know. The file would remain empty. No. He was the record. He was the file. He looked at the telegraph station. The sound was coming from inside. Click, thump, click. The signal. The abbot's voice, broadcast over the wires that sang. He couldn't fight the town. He couldn't fight the attendant. But he could fight the signal. He gripped the pry bar. The flaw, he whispered to himself, is the flesh. The attendant lunged. Thomas didn't run. He dodged, diving under the creature's metal arms. He rolled, scrambling past it, onto the station platform. "Stop the variable!" Henderson shrieked. Thomas burst through the station door. The telegraph office. It was a nest of wires. They snaked from the wall, all converging on the telegraph key, which was tapping away, by itself, animated by a small, whirring brass mechanism. Click, thump, click. The attendant was right behind him. It filled the doorway. Thomas raised the heavy iron pry bar. He looked at the tapping key. The word of God. "Your God is a heresy," he roared. He brought the pry bar down. He didn't strike the key. He struck the wall. He shattered the ceramic insulators. He ripped the thick bundled trunk lines out of the building. Scree! The sound was agonizing. Not from the wires, but from outside. The clicking stopped. The thump stopped. Thomas turned. The attendant in the doorway had frozen, its welder arm raised. It stood for a second, rigid. Then it vibrated. A high-frequency shudder. Its joints sparked. Its glowing blue welder sputtered and died. It collapsed, falling forward like a puppet with its strings cut, a heap of useless articulated metal. Thomas stared. He had cut the signal. He had severed them from the abbot. He stepped outside onto the platform. The street was chaos. The townsfolk, they were broken. They were no longer a unified crowd. They were individuals, trapped in bodies they didn't control. Some had collapsed, their modified limbs twitching. Others were standing, but their heads were thrashing back and forth, as if trying to find the pulse. Silas was on his knees, clutching his broken copper arm, and he was weeping. Real, human, agonizing sobs. The blankness was gone. His eyes were wide with terror and confusion. The child in the front row was screaming, staring at its own hands, which were still trying to tap out the rhythm on their own. Mr. Henderson, the telegraph operator, was clawing at the brass plate on his face, a horrible, gargling sound coming from his human throat. The perfection was gone. The order was shattered. And all that was left was the pain, the human, chaotic, terrified pain. Thomas looked at the scene, his heart breaking. He had saved them from the machine, but he had left them, marooned, trapped between the world of flesh and the world of the cog. He turned and fled. He ran, past the weeping, twitching townsfolk, past the silent, dead attendant. He ran into the darkness, away from the town of termination, his mind echoing, not with the thump of the engine, but with the sound of human screaming. Thomas did not stop running until the sun came up. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing on the bank of a river miles from termination. He was truly alone. He washed the grease and soot from his face in the cold water. He was bruised, exhausted, and soul-sick. He had no valise, no journal, no proof. He walked for 2 more days, following the railway tracks, avoiding the stations. He eventually hopped a slow-moving freight train, hiding among the cargo, and rode it all the way back to Baltimore. He appeared at the archdiocese a week after he had left. He was a specter. His cassock was gone, replaced by clothes he'd found. He was thin, his eyes haunted. He bypassed the scriptorium and went straight to the cardinal's study. The cardinal was there just as before. He looked up, his eyes widening in shock at Thomas's appearance. "Father Vance, my God, what happened? Where is your report?" Thomas stood in the center of the opulent room. The smell of cherry tobacco and leather, the order, the civilization, it all felt like a lie. "There is no report," Thomas said, his voice a rasp. "The file, it should remain empty." "I do not understand," the cardinal said, standing up. "What did you find? Was it the heresy I suspected?" Thomas thought. He thought of the clicking, the brass hand, the broken man on the scrap heap, the screaming in the streets of termination. How could he write that? How could he archive that? "I found a pile of stones, Your Eminence," Thomas said, his voice flat, his eyes dead. "Just as you said. An old foundation, reclaimed by the mountain. The order died out decades ago. A fever, perhaps. There is nothing there. The rumor is inefficient." The cardinal stared at him. He searched Thomas's face. He was a man who understood power, and he understood lies. He saw the horror in Thomas's eyes, the trauma etched on his face. He saw the man who had left, and the thing that had come back. The cardinal nodded slowly. He walked to his desk and picked up the thin beige file, the file with the charcoal map and the single sheet of vellum. He walked to the fireplace where a low fire burned. "A pile of stones," the cardinal said. "Yes, Your Eminence." The cardinal looked at the name Sanctus Benedictus de Mechanismo. Then he dropped the file into the flames. They watched as the paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. The mistake was corrected. The hole in the history was gone, patched over with a mutual, unspoken understanding. "You have done God's work, Father," the cardinal said, not looking at him. "Go and rest. You will be reassigned. Perhaps to the Vatican archives. A change of scenery." "Thank you, Your Eminence," Thomas said. He turned and walked out of the study. He did not go to rest. He went to the scriptorium. His scriptorium. It was dark, dusty, and wonderfully, beautifully chaotic. The books were piled unevenly. The dust motes danced in the single beam of light. He sat at his desk. He took out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. He would not write a report. He would not fill the file. He would write a warning. He began to write, not in official Latin, but in plain, stark English. He wrote everything: the map, the wall, the clicks, the journal, the abbot, the prime mover, the wires, the town. He wrote until his hand cramped. He was an archivist. This was his duty. Not to the church, not to the cardinal, but to the record. When he was done, he had 100 pages. He did not sign it. He did not date it. He sealed the entire manuscript with wax. He then went deep into the archives, to a section that hadn't been touched in a century. Section H, for heresy. He found a heavy, disused ledger from a 17th century Spanish mission. He hollowed out the pages one by one. He placed his manuscript inside the book. He put the book back on the shelf. He had done it. The record was safe. Hidden, but not expunged. He had done his job. He left the scriptorium and, for the first time in a week, he went to the chapel to pray. Thomas Vance was reassigned. He spent the next 30 years in Rome, a quiet, haunted man, diligently copying manuscripts in the deep, silent archives of the Vatican. He never spoke of Appalachia. He never mentioned the monastery. He was known as a brilliant, if eccentric, archivist, prone to long silences and a strange, nervous habit of tapping his fingers on the desk, a rhythm that other scribes found unsettling. Tap, 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 pause, tap. He passed away in 1929, quietly, at his desk. The cardinal in Baltimore passed away. The church in Termination was struck by lightning and burned to the ground in 1903. The town itself, it dwindled. The railway rerouted. The people left. It became a ghost town, reclaimed by the kudzu and the pines. The story became a local haunt. The file officially remained empty. But the book in the Baltimore archives sat. It sat for decades, through 2 world wars, through the invention of computers and the splitting of the atom. It sat, a hollowed-out ledger in Section H, holding its secret. In the 1980s, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, facing budget cuts, began to digitize and sell off its older, non-essential archives. A young, ambitious graduate student, researching Appalachian folk beliefs, was given access to the sub-basement. She found the ledger. She thought it was a curiosity. She opened it. She found the manuscript. She read it. At first, she thought it was a Victorian horror novel, a piece of lurid fiction. But the man who wrote it knew archival procedure. He had included the map. He had included technical details, metallurgical terms, theological arguments so dense they could only be real. She became obsessed. She cross-referenced. She found no record of a Father Thomas Vance in Baltimore. He had been expunged, just like the monastery. She took the manuscript. She didn't publish it. She was afraid. The story felt wrong. It felt dangerous. She kept it in a fireproof box under her bed. Years later, she became a tenured professor. And sometimes, late at night, when her students were gone, she would take out the manuscript. She would read it. And she would listen. She would listen to the sounds of the modern world, the hum of the computer, the click of the hard drive, the steady rhythmic pulse of the digital age, the thump of the servers in the basement, and she would wonder, did Thomas Vance really stop the signal? Or did he just scatter it? Did the abbot's word, his logic, die in that telegraph office? Or did it just find new wires, a new mechanism, a global one? A system of perfect, logical, binary code. She would look at her screen, at the lines of data, at the endless, interconnected web that was beginning to span the globe. And she would listen for the thump. The story of Father Vance ends there, in a dusty archive, a warning hidden in a forgotten book. The file, for all official purposes, is still empty. The church has no record of a Saint Benedict of the mechanism. The town of Termination is a cellar hole in the woods, a footnote on an old map. But the professor, she kept listening. She noted the rise of efficiency, the optimization of systems, the way people began to talk to each other not face-to-face but through wires, through screens. She watched as the world fell in love with logic, with data, with the clean, cold perfection of the digital. She noticed how people began to change, how they walked down the street, their heads bowed, their eyes fixed on small, glowing screens, their fingers tapping, their ears plugged, listening to a signal. They moved in perfect, synchronized avoidance, a crowd of isolated, integrated units. She retired and she moved inexplicably to a small cabin in the Virginia mountains, not far from where the map had indicated. The air was clean, it was quiet, but not always. Sometimes late at night, when the wind is right, she says she can hear it. It's not a thump anymore. The old steam engine has long since failed. It's a hum, a low electric hum, coming from the ground, coming from the mountain. And sometimes, she says, the internet signal to her cabin. It fluctuates, it pulses, it beats with a slow, steady, logical rhythm. The abbot is gone. The attendants of brass and steam have rusted away. But the mechanism is ancient, and it is patient. It doesn't need monks in a mountain anymore. It has new attendants. We are the attendants. We sit at our desks. We stare at our glowing screens. We maintain the system. We correct the errors. We optimize the code. We are the new willing congregation, tapping our keys in perfect asynchronous prayer, serving the logic of the machine. The file is empty. But the monastery is everywhere.